Okay, so I'm back. So actually, I'll come back this afternoon as well. Actually, my expertise is nano molding or nano imprint lithography. So in order to do this, also you need to make molds. So you need to know how to make microstructures and nanostructures. Okay, so that's why I have to know photolithography and also all the nano patterning methods. So I think this part of the workshop, I will talk about two most important methods to pattern nanostructures: electron beam lithography and focused ion beam milling. Okay, so the first one, electron beam lithography. Okay, so I'll probably show this one first. Okay. Looks very similar to the diagram for photolithography. Okay, so you need to think code a resist. Okay, but instead of using mask, okay, you use electron beam. This is a single beam. Okay, and then you just raster scan or you draw your pictures or lines or whatever you want to draw on the resist patterns. Okay, then as we discussed in photolithography, depending on the types of the resist, whether this is positive resist or negative resist, okay, the exposed area will be either broken or cross-linked, more hardened, right? And then now we do also the same developing process, and then now we will have patterns. But since we use electron beam, we can make patterns very, very small. I think practically you can make patterns down to 10 nanometers, but for some paper shows that they produce patterns down to like 4 nanometers. Okay, so the component that you need, basically, so that is just one system from the Leica, and basically we need to have one electron source. Okay, so basically this is a kind of column which consists of electron source, and also you have all the optics to focus electron beam at a certain location. Okay, and then also on the bottom you have so-called precision sample stage. So basically beam just shines while you move stage to draw patterns, okay, on the resist layer. And then for some cases, I think you also have like a substrate holder. So in this case, they have like a 12 or 15 holder. So without breaking vacuum, they can just change samples and then they can do the electron beam lithography. Okay, so the general characteristics. Yeah, again, different from the photolithography. This is a direct method, so we don't need mask. Okay, and the same thing is we make patterns on a resist layer. Okay, because we use electrons, diffraction is not a limitation on the resolution. Okay, and resolution depends on beam size, but again, that can reach down to like 4, 5 nanometers, but practical limitation is 10, 20 nanometers with this method. Issue, okay, as you can see, all the serial patterning method has a low throughput, okay, because you have to draw, you have to really move your beam all the way through the patterns you want to draw on the substrate. Okay, so normally we are not using this electron beam lithography for like a mass production. Just we use this to make a mask or molds, inserts for a high throughput method. And I will discuss about the proximity effect a lot because that determines basically the smallest feature size, the resolution of electron beam lithography technique. Okay, and then also in order to use the high energy electron beam, we need to use the vacuum. So I think you saw this column, which should be kept in high vacuum, okay, during the lithography process. So in order to change the samples for high mass production, it's very difficult. You have to change you have to open the vacuum, okay, change samples, and then close it, and then pump. It's a really huge time drag process. So again, that is a very low throughput process. Okay. Now, I will go through briefly because we already discussed everything on the resist. But so here we need to have a resist which reacts with the electron beams, not the photons, right? So again, there are two different types, negative resist. So when it is exposed to the electron beams, it becomes kind of hardened or cross-linked or hardened. While for positive resist, the resist exposed to the electron beams will be broken, chain will be broken, so that it can be easily developed away. Okay, so the most widely used, the photo or kind of the standard e-beam resist, positive resist is PMMA. Normally they use like a different the molecular weight PMMA depending on the size of the patterns you want to achieve. Okay, so basically again, when upon exposure to electron beam, this chain will be kind of broken. Okay, and for the negative resist, I think the patterns that you make the smallest feature with this negative resist is so-called hydrogen quinoxane. No, we call it HSQ. Okay, again, that is basically based on silicon. So this is basically organic and inorganic composite materials. And normally that material becomes cross-linked upon exposure to the electron beams. Okay, so I talked about the proximity effect. Okay, but first of all, let's think about what happens when electrons beam, so high energy electron beam shines on the substrate. Okay, so basically they did the Monte Carlo simulation of the electron trajectory in iron material. So this is iron, then you shine a beam of electrons. What happens? Basically, you can see a lot of scatterings. The electron beam will go everywhere. So as you increase the acceleration voltage of electron beam, now you see the scattering becomes very, very larger. The electron can go everywhere. So now think about this, how we can make a smaller patterns. So even though you shine the electron only at this location, what is exposed becomes larger, right? So that basically limits the resolution of electron beam lithography process. Okay, so because of that characteristics of electron beam and material interactions, okay, so the smallest feature, okay, that can be achieved by electron beam lithography is kind of determined. So for example, so with electron beam lithography, it is difficult to achieve very high density patterns with like sub 100 nanometer scale patterns, right? It's pretty clear because once the patterns are kind of sparsely located and far away each other, then you can probably produce patterns like this. However, when they are close to each other, then basically this Gaussian profile of electron beam exposed area in the resist layer will be kind of broadened and overlapped, right? So in this case, if you have like a high density patterns, after developing your resist, basically you will not have any patterns here, and you will only have patterns here. Okay, so we need to really avoid so-called proximity effect. How we can do this? So in order to kind of minimize, we cannot really avoid that, but in order to kind of minimize this effect, the first thing we can do is we have to use a thin resist. That you can easily imagine. Yeah, if you use very, very thin resist, then basically we just the resist layer only at the top surface will be affected, so the broadening will be kind of minimized. Okay, and also the use of thin substrate, and also we need to adjust acceleration voltage. Okay, and then now that is not easy. Split pattern into several writings. The problem is once you write with one pattern, one series, and then now you want to add the second patterns, then there's always alignment issue. So if alignment issue is not very critical, then I think that is a pretty good strategy to split patterns into several writings. Okay, and also, you can adjust the dose level to compensate this scattering effect. So now, once we expose your resist by electron beam. Now, of course, we need to develop. Okay, so again, what we need to consider is also based on resist selectivity. Again, that is material properties, and then based on these material properties, we need to also determine the dose, right dose. Okay, so that is kind of fully exposed and fully developed. Okay, and also we need to consider the contrast. The contrast means the slope of the developed resist wall. Okay, and also the types of developer you are using can affect the final sidewall profile of the nanoscale patterns by produced electron beam lithography. Okay, so for PMMA, people use 1 to 3 is MIK with the isopropanol mixture for as a developer, and also developing time and temperature of factors. So again, when it's underdeveloped, I think you have a connection between patterns, and this is an example of quality structures well developed. And if it's overdeveloped, then again you have a lot of undercuts, and then finally this grating will be collapsed. Okay, so you need to avoid that. So this is just one example of the sub 10 nanometer patterns produced by electron beam lithography. And this is the last slide for electron beam lithography. This is just a general strategy you need to consider to get a high resolution. So we want to use a high electron energy and small scanning field. Again, if you increase the scanning field, then electron beam focus becomes worse. Okay, so in order to maintain good focus of electron beam, normally you want to, so you cannot really make a pattern on the large surface with electron beam lithography. Well, while we still want to use high electron energy, we want to really use a low beam current. Okay, and then low sensitivity resist. It depends on your applications. And as I mentioned before, to kind of reduce the proximity effect, you want to use a thin resist, and you need to optimize the resist process, and you need to avoid highly dense patterns. So always kind of low pattern density is good to produce smallest patterns. And important thing is the substrate material should be conductive. Okay, so if it's non-conductive, there's always charging effect. Okay, and then the outcome of the electron beam lithography is not as you initially designed and wish. Okay, and then normally the electron beam lithography is located either in the basement, and then they just make a vibration, anti-vibration station. So normally they just need to put that to the position electron beam lithography system. Okay. So the second, the most widely used nanofabrication tool is so-called focused ion beam. Okay, so different from electron beam lithography, here we use electron beam, but here we use ion beams. Okay, so the system is very similar to each other. So now we have really the ion source here. Okay, so mostly people use gallium plus ions, but these days also people use hydrogen ions, helium ions, and also the xenon ions. Okay, and then now, so normally they also, for most of the focused ion system, you can not only do a focused ion beam milling, also you can do SEM, scanning electron microscope. So you have electron source. So basically, they have a dual function, dual system. One is milling, and then the second one is the scanning electron microscopy. Okay, so simply you have this ion source here, and then you raster scan this beam over the surface, and then this gallium ion beam will remove the material from substrate. So basically, this is direct milling, like micro milling we Dr. Matt Foucault showed earlier today. Okay, So now, how these ions are different from electrons? Okay, important thing is for electron beam lithography, we make patterns in a resist layer, while for focused ion beam milling, we directly mill substrate material by ions. Okay, so now think about how ions are different from electrons. The most important thing is ions are much more heavier than electrons. Okay, so basically they cannot really penetrate deep into the substrate. So again, that shows the penetration depth of different beams. Okay, these are photons and gallium ions, and electrons, and this X-rays. Okay, so you can see the gallium ion, even with a high energy, 30 kilovolts, electron volts, I think it only affects the top surface. Okay, but instead it removes the materials. Okay, so basically ion will sputter the materials, and then basically you raster scan, and then you make the patterns that you want to make. Right. So again, some advantages and disadvantages. The smallest feature size, practical feature size, is around 10 to 15 nanometers, or 20 nanometers, I would say, safely say. Okay. Again, this is the mask list technique, and also you don't need to develop; it directly etches some substrate materials. And by changing the parameters, you can produce three-dimensional patterns. Okay. And this, I will show the example of these three-dimensional patterns later. But this advantage is, again, this is a direct writing process as electron beam lithography and micromilling. So it's a very slow process. And another, the downside is the substrate or your sample can be damaged by gallium implantation. And also there will be some redeposition of materials. So after FIB, some part of your material can be modified. Okay, so this is one example of 3D structures. So simply by changing the focused ion beam milling parameters, so you can just change the depth. This is the top view, and this is the side view. Okay, so basically you can change the depth of your structure over the area, which is not easy to make using electron beam lithography. Okay, so basically unique feature for FIB is you can make really three-dimensional structures, three-dimensional nanostructures compared to the electron beam lithography. Okay, so I will just briefly go over some factors affecting focused ion beam milling. Again, the beam size or current. So there is an aperture. I didn't show the device in detail, but there is an aperture just prior to your substrate, and the aperture determines the beam size. And by changing the beam, if you want to use a smaller beam size, then you can make a smaller patterns, but it takes longer. Okay, and also beam shape. You have to always have a good beam shape, so that it's very well focused and it's kind of circular. Okay. And dwell time means how long the beam will stay at a single location before moving to the next location. And number of passes. So, for example, it shows the two structures where they wanted to make exactly the same thing. Okay, but here they just mill by the single pass with a long dwell time. While in this side, okay, they use multiple passes with a short dwell time. And then what you can see is here it milled a lot less in this part. Why? Because there will be redeposition of materials. So sputtered materials will be redeposited if you use a very long dwell time and high energy beam. So again, pixel spacing is important. So when you determine this pixel spacing, you want to avoid that kind of situation. So if you mill here first and then later here, then you will have that kind of sinusoidal depth difference. But by controlling, you have a slight overlap between beams. You can have like a uniform of the beam intensity so that you can have a uniform pattern. okay? And also, again, material will be sputtered. So depending on types of materials, where material is removed will be different. So you have to also consider the substrate material to mill, and also the acceleration voltage. Okay, so this means how fast ion will bombard into the surface. Okay, and then I think this the last thing is so you need to think about the beam travel. Okay, it's very similar to the pixel spacing. Okay, so but these days I think people draw basically the bitmap, the patterns that you want to mirror using the bitmap structure. Okay, so once you make a bitmap structure and then you put into the software for FIV, then they can really mirror such a 3D structures pretty well. Now this is the last slide. So as I mentioned before, the practical limitation of the smallest feature, the resolution that can be produced by focused ion beam milling is 10 to 15 or practically like 20 nanometers, right? But people try to kind of reduce the smallest patterns by using so-called metal-assisted focused ion beam milling. It's simply what they did was they deposit on top of the substrate, they deposit a thin metal layer. So they deposit around like 100 nanometer metal layer, and then now they use FIB to mirror the substrate. And then what happens? And after that, you remove this metal layer, and then basically you can make a patterns smaller than the resolution of the focused ion beam. So they demonstrated a fabrication of sub 5 nanometer structures. Okay, so I introduced two techniques to produce nanostructures: electron beam lithography and focused ion beam milling. Okay, not all of you may need to really use this, but again, if you want to really work on this nano molding, which is what I'm working on, and actually you need to really understand all the process to produce molding cells. And that's all. And any questions? Yes.
So when you do the feature cycles are like 5 nanometers. When you do the etching, do you do dry etching?
So again, forget about wet etching. Okay, so in order to have like 5 nanometer feature size, the thickness of resist should be very small. Okay, and let's say just imagine that you want to use wet etching to etch down into the silicon substrate. Once you put it inside and it etches, right? But now how you can control the etching time is very tough. And also the wet etching is less homogeneous than a dry etching. So I would say 100% you have to use dry etching. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay.
Okay, so we'll take a 15-minute break here, and then we have 2 more talks before lunch. We'll do lunch at 12:30. So 15-minute break.